Okay, so today we're going to be, diving into some pretty deep waters
Yeah.
with Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
It's a classic.
It's a classic. I think most people would agree.
Definitely.
Not exactly, light beach reading.
No.
But it's one of those books that's really stuck around.
Right.
And for good reason. So that's what we're going to dig into today.
And you know what's so fascinating about it to me is that it's one of those books, it works on so many levels.
Okay.
Like you can read it as just this strange story.
Yeah.
This bizarre tale.
Yeah.
But it's really when you start to dig into the metaphors and the symbolism
Okay.
that it really gets under your skin.
Okay.
It makes you think about what it means to be human,
Yeah.
what it means to be part of a family, to be part of society,
Absolutely.
and how we deal with things that are different, things that challenge us.
So let's start then by, for those who maybe haven't read it in a while or haven't ever, let's lay out
Sure.
what actually happens in this story. So we have our main character,
Gregor Samsa,
Gregor Samsa. He is a
traveling salesman.
traveling salesman. So not exactly, I imagine, living the most exciting life. Probably a lot of
Right. A lot of routine, a lot of pressure
team pressure. Yeah, exactly.
to perform.
And he wakes up one morning.
And he's a bug.
He's a bug.
Yeah, and you know what's brilliant? Kafka never tells us what kind of bug.
Oh, that's true.
He leaves it completely up to the reader's imagination.
I'm kind of glad you took that one.
Jackals.
Because I was trying to think, what bug was it?
And I think that's part of the genius, right?
Yeah.
Because it becomes this blank canvas onto which we project our own fears and disgust.
That's so true, because whatever I was picturing was not
Right.
pretty.
And it's going to be different for every reader, which is what makes it so effective.
Okay, so he's this bug, right? And so naturally his family
They're
is
horrified.
yeah.
I mean, who wouldn't be? You wake up, your son, your brother is a giant insect.
Right, and it's interesting too because they're horrified, but there's also this element of
Duty.
we have to take care of him.
He's family.
He's family.
Exactly. There's this sense of obligation, at least initially.
Right.
But it's also clear that this is not a sustainable situation.
No.
I mean, how do you integrate a giant insect into your life?
Right, how do you even begin to process that?
Exactly.
And so what happens?
Well, things deteriorate pretty quickly.
Okay.
The family, they try to adapt, but it becomes increasingly clear that they just can't handle
Right.
it. Gregor's losing his humanity, at least in their eyes.
And they're losing their ability to see him as anything but this creature.
Yeah, this thing.
And it's heartbreaking in a way because you see Gregor struggling to hold on to who he was.
Right.
But his transformation, it's like this physical manifestation of everything he already felt inside the isolation, the alienation.
And then ultimately he dies.
And that's when the family's reaction becomes even more unsettling, right?
Because they're relieved.
They are relieved.
Which is just, I don't know, it's chilling, isn't it?
It's really disturbing.
That this thing that they were so horrified by,
Yeah.
this thing that they felt obligated to care for,
Yeah.
is suddenly gone, and there's this sense of freedom, release.
Almost like they've been freed from this burden.
Exactly.
But it makes you wonder, what does that say about how we deal with things that make us uncomfortable?
That's the question Kafka's forcing us to ask.
Yeah.
Are we only capable of compassion when it's convenient? When it doesn't disrupt our lives too much?
It's a really unsettling thought.
It is.
And it makes you think about times in your own life when you might have turned away from something because it was just too difficult to confront.
Right.
And that's what makes this book so powerful, even after all these years.
Absolutely. It's like we're programmed to shy away from anything that disrupts our sense of normalcy.
Right, and it's easier to just label something as other than to actually try to understand it.
Exactly. And that's really at the heart of what Kafka is exploring in the Metamorphosis, isn't it? This idea of otherness.
And how we react to it.
Yes. And one of the most common interpretations of the story is to see Gregor as representing the alienated individual.
Like he's a stand-in for anyone who's ever felt like they don't quite fit in.
Right. And even before he transforms into this creature, you already get the sense that Gregor is trapped.
Trapped by his job, his family, the expectations of society.
Exactly. All those pressures, all those unspoken rules. It's like he's living this life that's been imposed on him.
And then his transformation, it's like all those feelings of alienation, of being trapped.
They become manifest in this very literal, very visceral way.
Right. He literally becomes the embodiment of everything that society finds repulsive.
And his family, you could argue, they represent how society at large responds to that kind of otherness.
So there's that initial horror, that instinct to recoil from something they don't understand.
Which is understandable, right? It's a natural human reaction.
But then there's also this attempt to adapt, to try to fit Gregor into their existing framework.
Like if they just try hard enough, they can make things go back to the way they were.
But of course that's impossible.
Because Gregor's transformation isn't just some external change.
It's like it's exposed something fundamental about their relationships, about their own capacity for compassion.
And what we see is that their compassion has its limits.
As soon as Gregor's needs become too inconvenient, too disruptive,
They start to pull away.
they choose isolation over engagement.
And that brings us to another really interesting aspect of Kafka's writing. His use of absurdity.
Right. The fact that Gregor's transformation is never explained,
It just is.
it makes you wonder, is Kafka suggesting that sometimes there are no explanations?
But sometimes life just throws these curveballs at us.
And we're left grappling with the unknown.
And the absurdity of it all.
And I think for a lot of people, that's a really scary thought.
It can be. But it can also be strangely liberating.
How so?
Because it frees us from this need to constantly search for meaning, for order, for explanations.
So instead of trying to force everything into neat little boxes,
We can embrace the chaos.
the uncertainty.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a different kind of truth in that space of not knowing.
It's like Kafka's giving us permission to sit with the discomfort of the unknown.
And to find beauty in the unexpected.
And he does all of this with this incredibly precise, almost minimalist writing style.
Which is interesting, right? Because you'd think a story about a man turning into a giant insect would call for this really elaborate, over-the-top prose.
Right.
But Kafka does the opposite.
Yeah, it's really striking, especially when you think about, like you said, the subject matter. You'd expect something a lot more, I don't know, sensationalized maybe.
Yeah, more grotesque, more over the top.
But instead, he's very matter of fact.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, this is just the reality, deal with it.
And somehow that makes it even creepier.
Absolutely. Because he's not trying to shock you with language. He's letting this situation itself, the sheer strangeness of it, speak for itself.
And that forces you to really confront it on your own terms.
Exactly. And he uses this really interesting technique, this kind of juxtaposition between the mundane and the bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
Like you'll have these passages where Gregor's describing his insect body in these very detached, almost clinical terms.
Right.
And then in the next sentence, he'll be worrying about whether he's going to be late for work.
It's so strange.
It's jarring. And it's that contrast that creates this sense of unease in the reader.
like you're never quite sure what to expect next.
Exactly.
And it also, I think, highlights the absurdity of the whole situation.
Absolutely, because it's like, even in the midst of this utterly surreal transformation, the everyday concerns of life still intrude.
Right, like the world keeps spinning, even when your world has been turned upside down.
Precisely. And then there's what Kafka chooses not to describe.
You mean like he never actually says what kind of bug Gregor turns into?
That's part of it, yes. But I'm also thinking about his physical description, or lack thereof.
Oh, you're right. He doesn't really go into detail about what Gregor actually looks like.
No, he gives us these glimpses, these suggestions.
Like the sound of his legs on the floor.
Yes. Or the way his family reacts when they see him.
But he never gives us a full picture.
And I think that's deliberate.
Because it forces the reader to fill in the blanks.
Exactly.
And we all bring our own fears and anxieties to that process.
So, in a way, the most horrifying image of Gregor is the one we create in our own minds.
Wow. That's actually kind of profound.
Kafka was a master of tapping into the power of the unspoken, the unseen.
It's true, and it's one of the things that makes the Metamorphosis such an enduring work of literature.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading
Definitely. And it makes you think about things in a different way.
it. It challenges your assumptions,
It makes you uncomfortable.
but in a good way, I think.
Yeah, in a way that makes you really examine your own reactions to the world around you.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up our deep dive into Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. It's been
Thought-provoking.
to say the least.
And maybe a little bit unsettling.
Definitely unsettling, but also, I think, ultimately very rewarding.
It's a book that asks more questions than it answers.
And leaves you with plenty to chew on, maybe more than you bargained for.
But isn't that the mark of truly great art? That it stays with us, it haunts us, it makes us see the world a little differently.
I think so.
So next time you encounter something strange, something that challenges your comfort zone, remember Gregor Samsa.
And embrace the discomfort.
Exactly. Embrace the discomfort.
This has been The Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.